Alright, everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to part 2 of the series. We're going to be talking about the autumn elections and the characters involved therein. So let's jump right in. If you haven't seen any of the previous videos, they're certainly in the playlist, so uh, definitely go check that out. So starting off, we have the Shokugeki with Joichiro as they come back from the uh, Mosea. He's there waiting for him, and we get a little bit more backstory as to Joichiro and his time in Totsuki Academy. Soma goes and he goes up against Joichiro in a Shokugeki, and both dishes are very good. However, one dish is obviously far superior, and that is Joichiro's. So once again, Soma takes another L, which is not surprising, of course, and we'll talk about that later. But Joichiro says, "Don't lose again till I face you again." Essentially, pretty simple. And then we have a very short, I like to call it a side quest with Tadakuro or Megumi, however you prefer. Tadakuro and Soma, they tag team up to serve kids and stuff like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then we get Hayama's introduction because they find out that the autumn elections prelims, the curry is going to be the dish that you have to create. So Hayama, being the curry expert and the spice expert, they visit the Shiomi uh, study where we meet Jun Shiomi and Hayama Akira, who teaches him the basics of curry. Then of course we have the prelims. Hayama gets the highest score of 96, I believe it was. Soma and Kurokiba just under, or no, I think believe actually Alice had the highest one. I'm sorry, Alice had the highest, followed by Hayama, and then Kurokiba and Soma, I believe, tied. And so the eight that passed were Alice, Soma, Hayama, Hisako, Takumi, Subaru, Kurokiba, and Tadakuro. We're introduced to some side characters like Hojo and Sadatsuka now, I believe that's how her name is pronounced, as well as a couple of judges. The two sisters or twins, I believe they were, that were judges in the prelims. And then we jump a little bit further as the first round begins. We have Alice versus Soma, where Soma comes up with the better bento box. Then we have Hayama versus Hisako, where Hayama destroys her with a burger. Then we have Takumi versus Subaru. This may not be in particular order. I'm just listing them, you know, per round. But Takumi versus Subaru, where Mimisaka Subaru, essentially the stalker, he stalks Takumi and comes up with a better recipe, and even anticipates Takumi's olive oil ad lib and manages to overtake him. Kurokiba versus Tadakuro, it is a very, very, very close match, even closer than they thought, where Kurokiba reveals his, how good he actually is when he says that he has a winning record against Alice Nakiri, although Tadakuro almost won, given that uh, Senzaemon, Erena's grandfather, had stripped and didn't even know it, and that was one of the metrics to Kurokiba's victory, so I do believe Kurokiba would have still won. However, it would have been a much closer match. Then we get to the semifinals where things start to heat up. We have Hayama versus Kurokiba. I believe this was the second match, but covering it first, where it was a tie. Yes, it was in fact the second match for this reason. It was a tie where it seemed like Hayama was had the upper hand, and then suddenly Kurokiba came back strong, and the judges were split. Then we had Soma versus Subaru, in which case Soma bet his life as a chef versus Subaru's knives, all of them, and Soma ended up coming out on top by not only improving his own beef stew, but he he essentially thought about how Subaru would improve the dish, and improved it even further. So then, of course, with the Hayama versus Kurokiba match and the tie, they propose that it's a three-way final with the Pacific Sauri, a fish. So in the finals, of course, we have Soma versus Hayama versus Kurokiba, in which they all have a Pacific Sauri dish. And while it seems like Kurokiba has something going, Hayama definitely takes the upper hand, and it's shown that he definitely is the better dish. Soma, serving last, appears to potentially win, but it is not his specialty. It doesn't seem like as much him on the plate as Hayama's Carpaccio, in which case Hayama wins the autumn elections. So that is our summary. Let's talk about the character development. So first I want to talk about Dojima again, who I didn't mention in the last video because I wanted to mention him here. So Dojima we get introduced to earlier on than the autumn elections, but he starts to really grow as a character because we sort of learn who he's affiliated with a little bit later. We find out that he's kind of Joichiro's friend and was also the first seat just over Joichiro's second seat. Essentially, he grows as a result of Joichiro growing and vice versa. So Dojima's a really interesting character and he's actually really cool. He's like a cool mentor type of character. Joichiro himself is just a straight up badass, and he is the character that Soma has to live up to. So he's a really like sort of unreachable goal type of deal that Soma is still trying to reach for. So I think that's amazing. There's not much else for Joichiro in this particular arc. Hayama is a character that we're introduced to in this arc, and he's incredible. Hayama is one of my favorite characters in the whole series because although he's got this nose, this the I don't remember if they call it the God's nose or not, but he has this incredible nose to tell like when something's done. Where his spice knowledge is incredible, and he's so good at packing a punch with aromas. And he really grows across this arc and really develops in such a way that we understand like Hayama is fighting for Jun Shiomi, who's another character that we're briefly introduced to, who took in Hayama when he was young, which is a great story, of course. He was like some kind of street rat that Jun took in. So it's a really, really good story that Hayama has, and it's a powerful one. And the fact that he wins, we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's kind of our wrap, the wrap. But yeah, he's badass. He's awesome looking, and he is just an overall just very well-rounded character in such a short time. Hisako, we had a little bit of prior to this arc as well, but Hisako really shines in the prelims with Sadatsuga now, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Hisako she's trying to fight for herself in a way that allows her to stand besides Erina, which I think is an interesting dynamic, and it's also an interesting way of comparing her with Hayama when Hayama beats her, saying you should be gunning for number one. That's why you lost, essentially. She's an interesting character, and she of course grows a little bit later on, which is nice. Now we have Subaru. I can't stand him. I'll be honest with you. He has a bit of an interesting character, and of course his backstory is alright. But I've never been a big fan of a lot of copiers. But in this case, he's just a stalker. Like, I don't know. I was never a big fan of him, but I think at the same time, he's one of those characters that you're supposed to not like as much, especially what he does to Takumi and whatnot. You're supposed to not care for him. I think Yuto did a good job writing a sort of villain in this arc for Soma to take down, because Soma versus Subaru is one of the most satisfying Shokugekis in this entire series. Then, of course, we have Alice. Alice, who was just introduced in the previous bigger arc, I should say. Alice, you really get to more from Alice in this particular one, and you get a really good glimpse of her cooking as she takes the number one spot in the prelims with a 96 score, and really just her personality shines, and you can see again more flashbacks from her and Kurokiba, who's going to be next. And really, Alice is just a great character to balance between like the bitchiness of Erina and sort of the sweetness of Tadakuro. She's a really good happy medium and really just kind of adds a lot to the female cast. Kurokiba is also a badass, and he's pretty funny, and he's got this rage cooking, which is pretty cool. And of course, he adds a really nice element to the trio that Soma, Hayama, and Kurokiba have, which is interesting. So I really like Kurokiba. Of course, we find out more about him and the fact that he was a child chef in seafood, and then Alice came and sort of took him in to be her aide, even though he was apparently better than her. Takumi, we saw a lot from Takumi, although this boy was done pretty dirty in this arc, for good reason, I would say. But Takumi, man, he went with his olive oil and still lost. I feel bad for him, like seriously. Takumi was really good. His rivalry with Soma sort of went on hold, I think, because it seemed this arc seemed to stray away from that for me. It seemed to go towards the trio rather than a rivalry between Takumi and Soma. And I think we're going to talk about that later on as to how good or bad that was. And I think when I wrap up, we'll talk about what I think was better, the trio or the rivalry. So, of course, we have Tadakuro, our one of our main characters. Tadakuro grows in that she really becomes a lot more confident on her own in this arc. She really comes into her own in the autumn elections arc, and that is so satisfying to watch because she struggles and struggles and struggles, and she's like, I can't just rely on Soma. I can't be the damsel in distress. And that is how you create a strong female character, is you have a character who she's girly, she has all these wonderful, aspects from that a girl would typically have, but she can hold her own. And Soma just brought it out in her. And I think again that's another important lesson is females I think can bring out certain things in men, and I think vice versa. Just typically, it's not always the case, but it's really interesting how Soma brings that out in her, and in turn she becomes confident on her own to be her own female and kick the competition's ass as much as she can. So Tadakura really grows in this arc, and it's amazing. Soma, on the other hand, becomes quite the character in this arc. Let me say, Soma is a character who really shines all throughout the story. He does grow quite a bit in this arc. Starting with the Joichiro Shokugeki, he really learns something, and he learns from Hayama and does his own aroma bomb in the prelims. And going up against Alice was a good moment for him. But again, my favorite moment with him is probably with Subaru when he says, I've been thinking about you too. So he had his beef stew. He had this great strategy of showing his beef stew to Subaru so that Subaru would one up it, but Soma was also planning to one up his own stew. So in essence, he almost basically leveled the playing field. And although he was still able to stalk Soma, it wasn't enough because Soma still kept some secrets from him, which I think is amazing. And then Soma's growth at the end is very interesting because him losing to Hayama once again is definitely a game changer for Soma, and we definitely start seeing that in the next arc and so forth. But him losing, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it does a lot for his character. Now, some other characters to note that we're just going to quickly talk about because although they have some importance here, not as much as some of the others. So we have our older characters, of course, Ryoko and Yuki and Ibusaki and Marui and all of them. So you can tell that their cooking has grown. They're only just barely highlighted in the prelims. They get high scores for sure, and they almost make it through, Nikumi included. If only it wasn't basically for Subaru getting a super high score, one of them would have made it through. So I mean, yeah, they get a little bit of development. Nikumi is called the Meat General now, not just the Meat Master, but it's not enough. We're introduced to Hojo in this particular arc. Hojo, who is a straight up sexist and hates men for X, Y, and Z reason. Yes, she has a definite good reason to have some bias, but I think she realizes that she took it too far. And this is another thing with Tadakoro, where when Tadakoro defeats her and, kind of changes her mind on things because she thought that Tadakoro was weak because she relied on Soma. And in actuality, it was the other way around. She just allowed Soma to bring out the best in her, and she really was strong on her own. So Hojo has some growth in this particular one. We see a little bit of Hojo. We just see flashes of her in the first arc, or in the training camp arc rather, but never by name or really speaking. But yeah, Hojo grows a little bit, and then we have Sadatsuka now, the stalker girl, not stalker guy, stalker girl, who is stalking Erina. She's interesting, I guess. She's kind of funny, and her cooking was pretty funny. But Hisako, of course, with her medicinal cooking, took her down, and then now she loves Hisako, which I think is hilarious. Erina, not much to talk about here. She really does not exist for the most part, except that she tried to block Soma from being in the autumn elections. Bitch. And they deny it, obviously, and they let him go through. And she sits by and watches everything happen, but doesn't really have much character growth. Not much, at least. We see a little bit of her, and her personality sort of develops just a tiny bit, but nothing crazy. We have our various judges. So, like I said, we have the girls with the blonde hair, the sisters. They're pretty cool, pretty interesting. We have Leonora, which is Alice's mother, who is actually pretty funny. How when she tastes something delicious, she suddenly can speak fluent Japanese. I thought that was absolutely amazing. Just a great, just a great quirk to have. And we have our alum judges. So Hinako grows a little bit. We see a little bit more of her, and we have like Taki and all them, along with Dojima. Of course, we talked about him already. The judges were all very interesting, and of course Senzaemon. We get to see a lot more from Senzaemon Nakiri. We really get an essence as to what his personality is like, and he is pretty cool. I always liked him. He's a badass. I would say overall, our character development is actually stellar, and the characters we are introduced to are pretty interesting, and the ones that kind of take the spotlight are incredible. They're all great. Soma, Alice, Subaru is like a good villain, I guess. Hayama, Kurokiba, Takumi, all of them. So I guess let's go ahead and talk about the story. So of course the Joichiro Shokugeki was pretty cool. It was a good story point just before the autumn election prelims. It was definitely a really good way of introducing Joichiro's skills and the rivalry that Soma has with his dad, and the develops the story between them and the relationships, which is really cool. The whole premise of the autumn elections is actually very interesting. Yes, it's another tournament arc in a anime and manga, sure. However, it has a practical purpose, whereas a lot of tournaments they're just tournaments. This one has one of the most practical purposes in a tournament. Of course, you're developing your students for the real world, and you're showcasing them off to the others to show like how they are. So you have potential suitors, like for example, one of the twins wanted to hire Hayama and apparently have sex with him or something. But stuff like that. And of course, it was good to set up for the stagiaire period. So it was all very practical. It made sense, and I think it all worked out very well. It was very cohesive with the plot of the entire story. Of course, we now have the matchups themselves and some of the surprises that we had that were actually really good for the story. So, for example, Hisako losing to Hayama was a good plot point because, of course, Hisako needs to grow in her own way. She needs to stand on her own and not just fight for Erina, in essence. Alice learns a very important lesson about cooking and how it's not just about cooking the best dish you can, but it's the best dish for the theme. So putting her up against Soma in the first round was definitely a really interesting sort of twist. Takumi versus Subaru was one of the biggest surprises because we expect Takumi to win that fight immediately and doesn't. So when he doesn't, it's sort of a surprise like, oh, I have this special olive oil I can use, and oh, I have all these great flashbacks. Obviously Takumi's going to win, and he doesn't. It ends up overpowering his dish. I think it's a great twist because I was angry about it at the time, sure, but it really set up for the beatdown that was Soma versus Subaru. So it was a good setup for that. Because Soma versus Subaru was satisfying. I wanted him to just beat the living shit out of Subaru. And he did. Of course, the Kurokiba versus Tadakuro match was full of, small surprises here and there. Was a very nice story. Of course, we had Tadakuro develop really well as a character, although Kurokiba was meant to win this one. And I think it's important that it's not always about your main characters winning, but it's about what they learn from the experience. And I think that's really what Yuto really drives home in this arc. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Because going forward, we have Hayama versus Kurokiba, which you're expecting one of them to win. You're like, okay. So the anime hyped up Hayama, and the manga hyped up Kurokiba, the way I see it. So because I was a manga reader, of course, at this time, I was expecting Kurokiba to win. And when they tied, it was very, very interesting and definitely a shock. And that three-way final was just great. The whole thing was it was set up perfectly. And of course, we can't talk about surprises without talking about the fact that Soma lost in the finals and that Hayama won. People who may have predicted it, good on you, but it was not obvious. So Soma, in his final dish, had like the secret thing. He's like, "Oh, but my dish is not done yet." And you're like, "Oh, here's where he comes and steals the show and wins." But not this time, because Hayama's dish was still better, which I I find it incredible. I think the story of setting up these three as a trio is incredible. It really does set up for a lot of amazing interactions that could have been had. And yeah, I mean, Hayama winning is one of the best plot points in the story, in my opinion. It just made so much sense for the character who's fighting so hard to win for June and cooking for somebody who he cares about, essentially. It really makes sense, and the fact that he wasn't the main character makes it even better. Because if Hayama was the main character, it would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be as satisfying because we're expecting him to win. So in this case, I think this is a section where subverting expectations is definitely a good idea. It's not always a good idea to subvert expectations, and we will get there later, trust me. But yeah, Hayama is an incredible character, and the plot point was just executed perfectly. So overall, the arc is so good. This arc, there's not much else you can say. It's so good. Everything about it just rocks. The story, the characters, the art, of course, and the recipes, they're all just so good. And I will say it here, this is the best arc in the entire series. This is hands down the best arc. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Please stay tuned as we will be talking about the stagiaire period and the Moon Festival next. So thank you all for watching, and we will We'll see you guys next time.